There's this compelling analogy that because I was actually on YouTube and I was just watching the Joker and the Batman. So before the Joker became, the Joker, he tried to follow society's rules. He was a lab researcher, scientist, doing just the normal work of society, what society expects of him. He wanted to fit in, to play by the book, but the system didn't accept him. He was overlooked, mistreated, ignored. Like during his tenure as a comedian, he was laughed at, saying, what is the guy doing? He's so weird, trying to be funny. Eventually, he embraced his uniqueness, even though it was labeled as evil, and in doing so, he became noticed and powerful in his own way. It's the idea that sometimes society doesn't reward those who conform, especially when they're different. Sometimes being different, being yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, is what sets you apart. Nadia, your story reminds me of that. You try to follow the system, like apply for internships, get support during the vacation, but simply because you were a girl in engineering during your time, the support wasn't there. The system wasn't designed for someone like you. But instead of backing down, you embraced your difference. You didn't wait for a seat at the table. You created Warm Up and Women in Engineering, building a whole new space for women in STEM. In a way, like the Joker, you were noticed for what made you different. But unlike him, you used it for good, to uplift others and change the system from the outside. So thank you for coming through today.
No, it's an
So
absolute pleasure.
I know it's a long intro, but it's how I actually before I actually yesterday, let me just say yesterday, I was just looking at this movie and I was like, this reminds me of this person. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna write these things down and I'm just gonna say how I view her narrative of how we view as a person. So can you just please, after the intro, just please introduce your background, what do you do, and who was Naadiya Moosajee before she became this incredible woman in the engineering space?
Sure. And I mean, I must admit that I've never been compared to the Joker before. I'm more of a Marvel fan than a DC fan. So Thanos maybe, but kind of jokes aside, love the kind of comic universe. And cinematic universe for Marvel Cinematic Universe. So who am I? I'm Naadiya Moosajee. I'm an engineer. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I'm a tinkerer. And I think those are the kind of three things that I hold near to me. I'm a lot of other things. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a friend. I'm a confidant. I'm a teacher. I'm a support structure. I have a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But, when I started out, I was just a girl trying to get into an engineering world and into a world that really wasn't created for us. And I'll give away my age here, but 20 years ago, getting into the engineering industry and recognizing that, there were not a lot of people that looked like me, sounded like me, or had the same background. And it was so much harder, to be able to kind of work yourself into a room to justify why you were occupying a space every single time you got into a meeting or got into a room, that you had to over-credential yourself. I've got a master's degree in engineering, so did an undergrad, did a postgrad, just so that I could be in those rooms and make sure that nobody had any doubt why I was in those rooms. And while I was studying engineering, I said, I'm a tinkerer. Went into engineering and recognized that there was a problem, but also recognized that if we all left as women of color, nothing would change in the system, right? And so, it's not a popular decision to go and be a rule breaker and a change and somebody who's going to go up against the system, but, somebody's got to do it. And it's been now 20 years of working to be able to, what we used to call, revolutionize the face of engineering, by bringing in young female engineering and tech talent, by supporting women entrepreneurs, to own the industry as well, right? So for us, it's not just around getting more diverse people into a space, but true transformation happens when you own it. And so how do we get more young people, more women, people of color to own the engineering industry? And then became an investor into some of the businesses that we were supporting, and then starting new businesses. So, being very much a serial entrepreneur, and looking now at where are the problems in society, or where the opportunities there are in society, and kind of building something to be able to solve a problem.
So how did, because now you're telling us that you went into this, became master students in engineering, you got your accolades and everything. So what were there any personal defining moments that shaped the kind of leader and entrepreneur you are today?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few. And so, while I did start a nonprofit, I am an entrepreneur, and you have to be in entrepreneurship to make money. And it took me a very long time to have a good relationship with money, because I was like, no, I want to do it to save the world. I want to do it because it's the right thing to do for humanity. But actually, a couple of years ago, and actually it would have been 8 years ago, because that's how old my son is. We had started our business. We hadn't been paid for a long time by our client. We were heavily in debt. When you're so in debt that the banks are calling you, to come and pay back your credit card loan, and you maxed out, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to turn. Um, you're in that financial hole. And my son was very little at the time, and I had to switch from formula to normal milk, because I just couldn't afford the formula anymore. And in that, when I look back, I always tell my business partner, Hammer, like, we never want to be in that place where we're having to trade off the things that matter and value to us. Because to be honest, at that point in time, I could have turned around and gotten into an engineering job, and it would have paid me 100, 200 times what, I mean, I hadn't at that point seen a salary for 6 months as an entrepreneur, right? And so that was kind of one of the defining moments to say that there's no harm in making money from what you do, and making loads of it, because the more money we make, the better impact we have, right? And then the second is understanding that there are some trade-offs that will pay you, the cost of those are really high, and you only see it in the long term, right? So now my son is got a lower immune system because of the choices that I made, right? And so I've got to live with those things for the rest of my life, and his, right? So the things that we do as entrepreneurs, the decisions that we make as leaders, have effect not just on ourselves, but also those around us. So I think that was, like, for me, one of the kind of the pivotal moments. And we ended up firing that client who didn't pay us, because and people go, how do you fire a client? How do you walk away from money? Right, as an entrepreneur. And sometimes when you have to walk away from a toxic relationship, even if there is money involved, sometimes it's not worth it, because when you open yourself up to new possibilities and new ideas, new people, new partners, new clients, you're able to really see yourself blossom. Instead of like chasing what is old, you can go and chase something new.
I want to get into the vision of the woman engineering. What was it, original vision and later warm up? And did you manage it to become what it is today? And also, just going back, did you ever think that, okay, I'm sure you're an entrepreneur, obviously, you're thinking this is gonna work, I'm gonna change the world, I'm gonna change the system of women, how women are taken as or just viewed in the big leaders of those corporate leaders, how they view women in engineering. So you try to change the system from the outside, but were there any supporters during your tenure? And also before getting funding from, because yeah, I want to get into the funding of the diamond company and all that stuff. Did you, and how do people pitch to these organizations? Like, can you just dive deep into that context of pitching, going somewhere because you're lost, you're in a lonely chapter, you're trying to make this work, but are you lost? Are you trying to find your way in?
I mean, it's work. I remember when we started Women in Engineering, it was actually called South African Women in Engineering. We must have sent out hundreds of requests for funding to every organization. And I always tell the story, it's going to become a joke now, that I even wrote to Oprah, because at the time Oprah had this show and she was very, very popular. And Oprah wrote back and said, well, not Oprah, but I always say like probably some intern in a basement somewhere said, thank you so much. The work that you're doing is amazing, but we just don't fund right now, right? And it's so funny because a couple of years later, the Oprah Winfrey Academy in Joburg invited my business partner to come and speak at the event, right? But I think, for a lot of the young people and me at the time, it was around persistence and hard work. And you can't get away from that. So we put in, they said, if you want to be an expert, there's like thousands of hours that you have to put in and lots of time. And so we would call and connect and contact so many organizations to try and access funding. The other thing I did was I became a chief networker. And my dad always used to say, "Are you a conferencing engineer?" Because every time I see you, you're at a conference. But because I don't play golf, so deals get made on the golf course still, but I don't play golf. So I had to find where there were people that I could connect with. And then and as we kind of grew, we started to kind of connect with other people who became champions for us. And who have been incredible allies and champions as we've grown and supporters. I think the thing is, when you're in it for 20 years, you can understand that we're in it for the long run. One, we are persistent as hell. I think the other thing is that we persevere through a lot of adversity. So it's not easy. I can tell you, in the 20 years, I can't tell you a single year that was just like amazing and fantastic. Every single year was a challenge in its own right. But sometimes when you think you want to change the world, you need to recognize that actually there's a lot of work that goes into trying to change the world. And we wanted to transform a sector, right? And I know in South Africa, the word transformation brings other connotations to it in different, especially in industry. There's quite a negative pushback around the word transformation. And for us, was really, how do you transform industries to be able to understand that people who are different add a lot of value to organizations. And so we even started to change the way companies thought about transformation. So everybody, when we'd run training and we'd meet with people, we'd talk about transformation and they'd bring their scorecard, right? Because in South Africa, you've got the BE scorecard and everybody's like this, and I was like, this is not about a scorecard, right? This is around how do you transform to high-performing teams by thinking about people who come from different backgrounds very differently, right? And I'll give you a good example. In engineering, so engineers, what people don't know is every bit of society is engineered in some way, shape, or function or form. If you look at crash tests for car safety, you'll see that women and children are hurt more than men, specifically white men, because the crash test dummies was always on the average white man's size and shape. So whenever you see those videos of the crash test dummy going into a wall, it's usually those dummies are modeled on the average white guy, because the average white guy was the engineers designing the cars, not short women, not you short men, and so not little kids. And so when you have more diversity at the table, you can go, hey, wait a minute, we're not an average, we need to lower the average down on our continent because actually we're short. And we're a bit chubbier, and we look different, we feel different, we have different body parts, and so we've got to think about what does that look like in safety tests, right? So that's the power of bringing in diversity into your team and getting people to understand and pitching that very differently to organizations. And so before they used to hear transformation, government, BEE, black, white, and we're like, no, that's all important. But actually what we're talking about now is lives. And we want to change lives. We want to make cars safer. We want to make it more convenient for people. Actually, that's why you need more diverse engineers. And so changing the way people thought about the problem was part of the way in which we were able to speak to all these organizations and pitch very, very differently to them what we were trying to achieve.
It's amazing. It's amazing, and props to you and your team for the work you've done. I mean, can you just tell us um how many people you've helped? How many people have said, "Oh, this organization has done so much for me," has changed the game for so many of us in the space.
Yeah, so I mean, we've worked with about 150,000 women and girls in over 33 countries around the world. And it's so funny because just before this interview, I was on a call, and and it's very random, but my brother reached out to me and said, he's got a friend whose wife is an engineer and she just needs some career and life guidance. Do you mind, chatting to her? And, I always say I never say no to a virtual or physical coffee because I was somebody who, 20 years ago had an idea or just needed some guidance. And, I reached out and somebody said yes and spoke to me. So I always try and say yes as much as humanly possible. And while I'm on the call with her, she says to me, kind of go through all the different conversations. And she says, Nadia, I've been following you for a long time. Um, and actually, I had met you in 2015. And I was just like, oh, okay, when did you meet me in 2015? She's like, no, I went to this program. I was still a student in high school, and you spoke about engineering. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's the Girl Eng program. So our idea was that if we created awareness for girls to go and study engineering, they would go, get inspired, go and study engineering, graduate as engineers. And she was on this program, was inspired. She said, me and my friend came to this thing and we were like, I wanted to be an engineer after hearing you guys speak. And then I got into engineering, and now she's graduated as an engineer. And I was just like, I said to her, you know what? I just want to thank you because I've got goosebumps and I have so many of these moments. So that was just what happened today. But I have so many of these moments that where young women were inspired to go and study engineering because of us. We also work with entrepreneurs, so women entrepreneurs specifically in STEM, and for us, STEM is science, technology, engineering, mining, and manufacturing. And we invest in these women. We help them grow their businesses, not just in South Africa, but cross borders. Help them grow in new markets, help them make more money, help them hire more people. And you get all these women come back and tell us like the impact that they've had. One of our companies that we invested in a health company called Zoe Health, they have scaled their operations into multiple countries. They're now into products in healthcare and vitamins now. So they've like really grown their business. And so every time I meet somebody who's been touched by WOMHUB or WOMEng through a program, I get goosebumps in terms of the impact that we've had on not just their lives, but in their communities and in their businesses.
So I want to get into something a bit not personal, but just yeah, different concepts. You know what I mean? Like, what's the biggest myth about entrepreneurship that you've personally had to unlearn? I'm asking this question because you're a Muslim, right? You learn the Quran. Am I right? Taught by the Quran. I'm asking this concept because there are structures that you basically follow whilst you're in your household with your family. When a daughter is raising his voice to his father, the father will say, read the Quran for every day. You hear what the Quran said, read it every day. But I'm asking this question because I'm asking it because as a black African, and I'm just, yeah, this is a podcast. As a black African, we're in a system where we're taught it's Christianity, it's these laws. That's why there's so many broken families, etc. So my concept is this: as an entrepreneur, you've thought of it as not a way to make money, but as a way to make impact in order to provide for your family. That was the same concept you've been taught. I'm asking this question because as a Muslim, you're coming from you're coming from different countries, and all the concept and all those that knowledge, history, history. You've been taught in a structured way about how businesses are made, and it hasn't been actually put into the minds of young people that were of young people of young Africans that were colonized in that manner about what businesses, how to start a business, how can we start to think differently about entrepreneurship. What's the biggest myth you've had? And yeah, let's just get into a very deep conversation because I think it's very necessary that we can learn from other races too and ask a foreigner, hey, dude, um, what's happening in Zambia or in Uganda? Why are you cutting my hair? Is there a different landscape in money? What's the story? So I just want to get into a very um yeah, just different topic. Yeah.
And let me just say that my ancestors, they trace their heritage back to South Africa for over 350 years. If you know the history of South Africa and the Western Cape, you know that the first kind of Muslims came as political prisoners. They were also on Robben Island. So if you go so before Nelson Mandela, former President Nelson Mandela was on Robben Island, there was a Muslim leader, and he caused so much trouble for the Dutch where he came from that they brought him here and they put him on Robben Island. And I remember as a little girl, Muslim people were the only people who could get special permits to go to Robben Island to go and visit the grave of this spiritual leader. And I remember going as a little girl on a prison boat to Robben Island to this grave of this Muslim leader who had caused so much trouble for the colonizers that they moved them here to Robben Island. And I think we have lost our own history, right? We learned about World War II and Germany and the alliance between Europe and America, and actually we didn't know that right next door to us in Namibia, the Nimahorira people there was a genocide there, and the people were wiped out, right? By the colonizers, to be quite honest. And I think that for me, it's an awakening as an African to go, how do I embrace my roots across the continent? And it's funny because whenever I get into anywhere, people ask us, I say, guess where I'm from, right? And they go, no, you're from North Africa. And I'm like, no, go down, keep going down. I'm from the opposite end, because they just assume I have Arab roots. And I'm like, nope, no Arab here. I can't speak Arabic, but I can read the Quran because I'm very Muslim by faith, and faith, and I think faith and spirituality and religion, is for everybody very different. But I think that Islam is very practical. So I'll give you a couple of things. What people don't know is that Muslim people every year we take 2.5% of our net worth and we give it to charity. So not to a church, or because I know you pay 10% tithes, we don't pay that. We take 2.5% and we go and give it to those that are less fortunate than ourselves. During Ramadan, we fast for 30 days so that we can feel the hunger of those that are less fortunate. And then at the end of the 30 days, the Eid, we have to pay a tax. And the tax is actually equivalent to rice or flour, and we have to give that away. But because we've starved for 30 days, we felt the pangs of the starving, we'll give more than just the kilo of rice or flour, right? We should give more. And so this idea of kind of centering your spirituality to make decisions around the way in which you run your business, technically we're not allowed to do anything with like interest, because interest is so terrible for society, right? If you think about how many people have been deeply in debt because they've taken a loan because they needed the money, and then that suddenly they're paying 25 to 40% interest. It kills their business, it kills their livelihood, it kills their credit record. So in Islam, we actually are not allowed to work with interest. And so as a business philosophy, those are the things that become really important for us. The other thing we say is you've got to pay a man before his sweat dries. So if somebody works for you, you've got to make sure that they pay it on time. So these are the principles that we bring into our business and to my business. But I want to tell a story because I think a lot of people don't know, again, our history, our own history, right? Because we sometimes also take out the women that have played pivotal roles in humanity. So, we also believe in Jesus. We call him Nabi Isa. So same dude, different name. One is the Arabic version, one is the English version, right? But we talk about him, but and the mother Mary, right? Which Maryam, same lady, right? And the powerful role that she played, right? But then over time in history, we've kind of taken her role out as this maternal figure. So people go and we see her figurines everywhere in church, and she's all covered just like I am, right? Right now, if you go to any church, you'll see the Mother Mary is not, she's fully covered. She's got a scarf on, and it's interesting to see how women have been eradicated in religion over time, right? And the power that they hold. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, so, we believe in all the prophets, except we believe some extra ones. So where Christianity stops at Jesus, and we believe in Jesus, right? So from a Muslim perspective, we would never say anything bad about Nabi Isa because it's the same guy. We believe in the same storyline, right? Then the only difference is, Christianity believes that Jesus died on a cross for their sins, and we believe that God saved him before and he will come back. And so we all believe he'll come back. We just don't believe he died on the cross, which is a kind of a pivotal piece in Christianity. But we also believe that Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet. And everybody knows that he had 4 wives, right? But people very often don't know the story of his first wife, right? So her name was Sayyidina Khadija. They used to call her the Princess of Arabia because she was a top businesswoman at the time. So if you think back then, they only had camels and horses. She used to train from what is now Saudi Arabia all the way to Iran. So they used to send caravans of goods. And she was this prolific businesswoman. She was in her 40s. And she found out about this guy named Muhammad, who was so trustworthy that whenever they would send their caravans, they knew that if they sent it with Muhammad, he would make sure that the caravan got there and that all the money came back to her. And she said, I want to meet this Muhammad. And she eventually asked him to marry her, right? So here you have this businesswoman who is in her 40s, ask a guy who is 25 to marry her. They call her the Princess of Arabia because she was so prolific at business. And they have 4 daughters. And they did have 2 sons who both passed away when they were little, right? Each one of her 4 daughters went on to lead universities. They went to go and lead like institutions and organizations, and they were prolific women of the time. And so you have this history, this feminine history of, just like, our own history was taken away. The feminist story was taken away from us, right? Because here's an example of an exceptionally incredible businesswoman who at the time went against every norm that we still have. So my husband is younger than me, and everybody jokes about it. They're like, oh, your husband is so much younger than you. And I was just like, no, but I am just following the path of Sayyidina Khadija. And he loved his first wife so much that he never married anybody else until she passed away, right? And so only when she passed away did he go and marry again, because the love for the two of them it's a beautiful love story, but it's also a story of like building something together and believing in and supporting your husband, but also being an incredible badass woman, right? So that's the story that I always share. And when I share the story, people go, I've never heard of this person. All I heard was Prophet Muhammad took 4 wives. And I'm just like, guys, let me tell you the feminist history and the history that I carry every day with me as a Muslim woman. Is I go, how could I be more badass like Sayyidina Khadija?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just in closing off, it's been a pleasure to interview and hear your story, and it's an honor really. Like, what advice would you give to young women trying to break into a male-dominated space like tech or infrastructure? And what are the proudest moments since launching Warm Up?
And look,
Oh, I
yeah.
forgot to ask this one book, your favorite book you've read that you live by.
I don't know about a book that I live
Same
by, but
question. Yeah.
there's a really good book called Factfulness, Why the World is Not as Bad as It Seems. And I think that the book was really interesting for me because sometimes we live in such a negative world where we go, and at the beginning of the book, there's a quiz that says, how many girls have been educated? And you actually start to see that over time, humanity has shifted and we have educated more girls and we have lifted people out of poverty, and there are better things. There's more people that have access to clean drinking water and safe spaces. Is it enough? Not yet, right? Have we forgotten some of our humanity? If I look at the world today, I say yes, right? Because anything that is other, right, and now we suddenly other, right, is not accepted, right? And so there's a big backlash against anything diverse, right? Because for a long time we've threatened the status quo of power. So I think that book has been powerful in terms of going, things are not as bad as it seems. And the writer was a Swedish professor, who passed away just after the book was finished, and actually didn't even live to see the launch of his book. So I think if you kind of want to take a dose of things are not as bad as it seems, kind of that's a good place to start. In terms of kind of young people, young women, and actually young men too, right? Because I think we spend a lot of time thinking about empowering our girls, but we also have to lift our boys with us, in the ways in the world, as well. So my advice is always find a tribe. We were all tribal and we kind of lost our tribes because we kind of moved into a more Western narrative. But that piece about Ubuntu for me is really important because that tribe are the people who will guide you. And in your darkest moments, I think about the tribe that I called on when I was really suffering, when I was struggling as an entrepreneur, when I was struggling as a mother, when I was struggling as just a person. It was my tribe that I had put together that really supported me through that. So I think for young people, just finding the people that you can trust that can support you. And you need a few people in that tribe. You need your devil's advocate, somebody who's going to ask you the really hard questions. You need a cheerleader, a praise singer, the person that usually comes up before president and he's like, oh, look at the president, he's so amazing. And then you need like that praise singer in your tribe who's going to like really pump you up. And then you need just a shoulder to cry on as well, right? So you kind of have a few people in that tribe that kind of make that work. And then, the world is shifting dramatically so quickly in the world of artificial intelligence and technology that it's hard to even keep up. So, I think about, I was speaking to the guys from IBM Watson Lab, right? So they were the first guys to be doing like really deep tech research into AI. And the guy said to me, one of the head of the labs, he said to me, he was reading this paper about AI like a while ago. And I was just like, how long is a while ago in the world of AI? And it was a year. So in a year is like a while ago in AI because things are moving so quickly. So I think how we win as young Africans is to be able to adopt artificial intelligence to make ourselves better humans, right? To use it to be able to accelerate our skills and get us into industries that we previously were never allowed access to, but technology has opened up the doors for us to be able to do so. So you could be sitting and well, I'm a civil engineer by background. I started getting into cybersecurity a few years ago. I took a course at MIT. I've never been to MIT. It's been a dream to go to MIT, although now with what's happening in the US, I don't think I want to step on any American campus because they don't have freedom of speech, right? So I'd rather come to my homegrown UCT. I can still, have freedom of speech and a voice. But I took a course at, the top university in the world from the comfort of my couch. Because I did it online and I learned about machine learning and cybersecurity. So everything is available online. It's around how we interact and what we learn. So I think spend our time being able to kind of build our own skills up as young people and then plug ourselves into the world because we bring something unique in terms of our perspectives, which is really important. And the world needs us because we are the youngest, most active population. And if we can skill ourselves in the right way and make sure that we have the right kind of leaders to help guide us, we'll be unstoppable as a continent.
Thank you. This went well.